I remember the day I first crossed paths with him. It felt as though I had discovered something rare, something that couldn't be shaken. There was a steady calm in him, a quiet confidence that drew people near without him even trying. And I was instantly caught in it. From the very start, our bond felt magnetic, almost inevitable. That first night, we talked for hours about everything and nothing. It wasn't just attraction. It was comfort, like meeting someone who finally spoke a wordless language I had been waiting to hear my entire life. Things moved quickly after that. Passion carried us forward, and certainty made it easy to follow. Friends told us we were rushing, but when you're convinced you've found the person who sees you completely, questioning the pace feels unnecessary. Marriage came as naturally as breathing. We didn't agonize over it. Just a courthouse, a few loved ones, and vows that felt effortless to speak, because we already lived them. We believed we were solid, inseparable, destined. The years that followed were built of small routines that gave our life warmth. Morning coffee side by side, private jokes only we understood, shared looks across a crowded room that whispered, "You're mine." We weren't glamorous or flawless, but we were steady. We created a home, a rhythm, a life that felt safe. But over time, something subtle began to change. Not an explosion, not betrayal, but a quiet dimming. Like a candle still lit but no longer glowing as brightly. Work grew heavier. Our schedules drifted apart. Intimacy didn't vanish, but it lost its spontaneity, became more planned, almost habitual. I told myself this was what marriage became with years. Love matures, passion ebbs and returns. Still, I longed for the electricity of our beginning. I could feel he longed for it too. It started in passing comments, easy to brush aside. He'd mention coworkers flirting. How flattering it was to be noticed. I'd laugh, tease, pretend it was harmless. But the remarks grew heavier. One night, after too much wine, he asked what I thought about open marriage. He said it lightly, framed it as curiosity, a modern thing couples try. I laughed it off, but the question lingered like smoke. I knew it wasn't just hypothetical for him. At first, the thought made me sick. I loved him too much to picture him with someone else. But I also loved him too much to ignore what he wanted. He swore it wouldn't change us, that it was only variety, nothing more. He promised no one else could ever mean what I meant. And I wanted so badly to believe him. More than that, I wanted to keep him happy. So I wrestled in silence. Nights awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was strong enough. I read articles, stories from couples who said it worked, who claimed it brought them closer, reignited passion, proved trust. That's what I wanted. To be the kind of wife who trusted so deeply I didn't need to cling, who could be open-minded and modern. When I finally told him I was willing, his face lit up with relief, with excitement. The joy in him cut me deeper than I expected. He seemed happier in that moment than he had in years. But I swallowed that pain and told myself this was love. I wasn't losing us. I was expanding us. If this was what he needed to feel whole, then I would give it. Together, we made rules. Absolute honesty. Complete transparency. Respect above all. No outside connection would ever replace our marriage. We said it like a vow. We were always each other's first. And in those moments, I convinced myself this was strength, that we were brave enough to succeed where others failed. But underneath, unease pressed down on me. What if I wasn't enough anymore? What if I had opened a door I couldn't shut? He kissed me, told me I was his everything, swore nothing would change. I wanted so desperately to believe him that I silenced the warning voice inside me. We stepped into that chapter with his excitement, my cautious hope. I told myself marriage evolves, that love requires compromise, that this was proof of devotion. I told myself we'd grow stronger, closer, more alive. But deep down, I feared I had given him permission to drift away, loosened a bond that should never have been tested. I smiled, agreed, kissed him goodnight, but wondered if I had just made the worst mistake of my life. The first weeks felt unreal. I tried to see it with curiosity, even optimism. I went on a few dates of my own, coffee, dinner. They were fine, pleasant even, but nothing deeper. The men were kind, some attractive, but no spark. It felt more like novelty than meaning, something I could easily walk away from. My heart stayed tethered to him. and every distraction only reminded me of what I already had. But for him, it was different. At first, he was casual, coming home from dates with the same easy grin, brushing off questions, calling it fun, just adventure. I tried to mirror his attitude, but I noticed changes creeping in. He checked his phone more often, shielding the screen, smiling at messages I couldn't see. The glow on his face when he typed, it wasn't one I'd seen in years, not even with me. When he went out, he stayed longer. I told myself not to be the jealous wife, not to ruin what I had agreed to. He always returned cheerful, sometimes distracted, but never apologetic. He didn't believe he was breaking any rules. And maybe he wasn't. But every hidden smile, every late-night message, every hour away from me chipped at the security I once felt. I tried to dismiss it, told myself I was imagining things, that doubt was natural in the beginning. I reminded myself I had chosen this too. But unease kept spreading. When I asked him how things were going, his answers were vague, dismissive. He said it was nothing serious, nothing worth worrying about. But when he said her name, so casually, almost too casually, my stomach turned. That was when I knew. There wasn't just someone. There was her. He didn't confess it outright, but I heard it in the way he spoke. The tiny details he let slip told me everything. The way she asked for her coffee, the way she adored that same little-known band he loved, the way she could make him laugh until his ribs ached. Tiny fragments of her had already begun creeping into our home, our marriage, my space. I wanted to confront him, but I stayed silent. Part of me was afraid of what the answer would be. Another part didn't want to look hypocritical. After all, hadn't I been the one to agree to this arrangement? If I challenged him, if I pushed back, would it seem unfair? Would I look like I wasn't strong enough to live with what I had allowed? So instead, I buried my feelings, forced a smile, and told myself I was fine. But I wasn't. The nights became lonelier. I would sit on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, listening for the sound of his key turning in the lock. Sometimes he came in and spoke to me, but more often he slipped into bed, brushed a half-hearted kiss across my lips, and fell asleep with his phone clutched tightly in his hand. I told myself not to look, not to cross the line into his privacy, but the temptation burned inside me. What was he saying to her? Was he laughing with her the way he used to laugh with me? I began comparing myself in ways I never had before. Was she prettier? Funnier? More thrilling? I thought about how she probably never had to nag him about chores, how she never saw him exhausted and irritable after work. She got the version of him still eager to impress, full of energy to give. I was left with the leftovers. The strain between us grew impossible to ignore. I found myself pulling away, hesitant to reach for him, afraid he no longer craved my touch. He sometimes reassured me, told me nothing had changed, that he loved me, that I was his wife and always would be. But words felt hollow when his actions shouted louder. His laughter with me was muted, his gaze didn't linger as long, and his kisses felt more like duty than desire. One night, he told me plainly that he'd been seeing someone regularly. He delivered it casually, as if mentioning a new colleague. He described her as fun, light-hearted, easy to be around. He insisted it wasn't serious, that I had nothing to fear. I nodded, forced a thin smile, and excused myself to the bathroom where I cried quietly into a towel. In that moment, I realized what I had dreaded all along was unfolding. What I thought would be freedom had turned into a cage of comparisons and insecurity. I wasn't losing him physically, he still came home, still shared our bed. But I could feel his heart slipping farther away with every step. And the cruelest part? I couldn't even call it betrayal. I had granted him permission. I had opened this door, and now I couldn't close it without admitting my mistake. Each passing day blurred the line between casual and attached. What I believed would strengthen us was becoming the wedge driving us apart. He was here, but in all the ways that mattered, he was already somewhere else. I felt it in my bones, in the silence between us, in the way I was already watching my marriage unravel from the inside. I told myself things would even out, that the novelty would fade, and we would return to each other. But it didn't. His focus on her sharpened, while his attention to me dulled. It wasn't dramatic at first, but it was unmistakable. He spoke of her the way he used to speak of me. Small quirks, little stories, insignificant details that somehow carried weight. He admired her thoughts, her tastes, the way she made him laugh. In the sound of his voice, I heard the truth. She wasn't just another date. She was taking up residence in his mind. I noticed how rarely he asked about my day. Our conversations turned into logistics, schedules, errands, obligations. When I shared something personal, he nodded distractedly, eyes already elsewhere. I recognized the distance because I had once been the one filling his thoughts. Now I was watching someone else occupy that space. The physical gap widened too. He was home less, and when he was, his energy felt different. He didn't reach for me as much, and when I reached for him, he sometimes stiffened before softening, like affection had to be forced. He wasn't cruel, not openly. He still said he loved me, still kissed me goodbye, still played the role of husband. But I could feel the absence behind the gestures. Love wasn't supposed to feel like an obligation. Yet that's what it was becoming. At night, I would hear him laughing in the next room, and I didn't need to ask who he was with on the other end. His laughter was freer with her. His smile brighter. His words quicker. He seemed alive in a way I couldn't touch anymore. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but the signs piled up until denial was impossible. I wasn't just sharing my husband physically. I was sharing his heart, his mind, and that was the intimacy I couldn't bear to lose. When I finally brought it up, I tried to remain composed. I told him I felt like he was giving too much of himself away, that our marriage was supposed to come first. He dismissed me with a wave, saying I was imagining it, saying I was jealous, reminding me that this was the arrangement we had chosen. He said I was still his wife, still his number one. But the words rang hollow when his actions betrayed them. I wanted proof beyond words, but instead he grew defensive. He accused me of smothering him, of not trusting the process, of failing to love him enough to let him be happy. He twisted everything, making my pain feel like weakness instead of proof something sacred was breaking. The more I retreated, the deeper he seemed to sink into her. He began slipping, mentioning her favorite meals, comparing how she did things differently than me, laughing at her stories as though they belonged to us. Piece by piece, she seeped into our home until I couldn't escape her shadow. I didn't know her face, but I felt her everywhere. I had once thought infidelity was about secrecy, but this was worse. This wasn't hidden, it was permitted. But watching him fall in love with someone else under the guise of honesty was a cruelty I hadn't foreseen. It was betrayal disguised as truth. Abandonment wrapped in rules we created together. I still tried to fight for us. I dressed up. I planned dates. I tried to spark conversations that weren't about logistics. Sometimes he humored me, but his heart wasn't there. His phone buzzed endlessly, and even if he didn't check it, I knew who it was. The silence between us felt filled with her presence. Nothing I did could compete with the thrill of someone new. The breaking point came when I asked him outright if he was falling for her. I had rehearsed the question countless times, and when I finally spoke it aloud, my voice trembled. He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "It's not like that." But the hesitation in his eyes told me everything. It was exactly like that. He could deny it, but love always shows in the way someone lights up at the mention of a name. In the way they can't help but drift. In the way they slowly slip away from what they once swore would last forever. I walked away from that talk feeling empty inside. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him not to leave me. But I knew pleading wouldn't change a thing. Love doesn't come back because you demand it. It slips away quietly, and by the time you realize it's gone, it's already too late. I believed I was strong enough to face transparency. What I hadn't prepared myself for was the pain of watching someone give their heart to another right before my eyes. Silence became my home, the burden mine alone to carry. Friends would ask how we were, and I'd lie, saying everything was fine. I couldn't face the humiliation of admitting I had agreed to the very thing that was breaking me apart. I wore smiles in public and shed tears in private, drowning in the truth that I was losing him little by little. It became undeniable that the woman he was with wasn't just a passing fling. She had become his escape, his fresh start, the one who made him feel alive again. And I was left behind, still his wife on paper but no longer in his heart. Our so-called open marriage hadn't broadened us. It had carved me out of his world, leaving me to watch him build something new with someone else. The moment I could no longer deny reality came without drama. No fight, no sudden reveal, no explosive confession. Just the way he spoke about her, with a tenderness that used to belong only to me. The way he lingered on his phone long into the night. The way his laughter carried a lightness I hadn't heard in years, and none of it was for me. When I asked him outright if he loved her, he hesitated just long enough for my heart to break. He said no, but his eyes told the truth. In that pause I knew everything. After that, our marriage became a performance. He still came home, still shared my bed, still played the role of a husband when it fit. But I was living beside a man whose thoughts and heart were elsewhere. He didn't see me anymore, not really. I was just the backdrop to his life, the stability he leaned on while giving his best self to her. I had thought openness would make us stronger. Instead, it hollowed me out. I gave him freedom, and he used it to fall in love with another woman. Nights were the hardest. I would lie beside him, listening to his steady breathing, and wonder if he was dreaming of her. When his phone buzzed on the nightstand, my chest tightened, knowing whose name was lighting up his screen. Sometimes he'd smile in his sleep, and I knew it wasn't because of me. I was living in a marriage where my body lay next to his, but my presence no longer mattered. My soul felt miles away. I blamed myself more than I blamed him. I told myself I had been foolish, that I had traded safety for the illusion of being progressive. I wanted to be the wife who was trusting, who was easygoing, who didn't cling. Instead, I became the wife who handed her husband to another woman, and then watched as he gave himself away piece by piece. The self-blame was merciless. If I had said no, if I had set limits, if I had been enough from the start, maybe things would have been different. Those questions haunted me, looping endlessly, poisoning every memory we'd built together. The loneliness devoured me in ways I never expected. It wasn't just the absence of intimacy, though that cut deep. It was the absence of being chosen. Marriage thrives on small affirmations. The good morning kiss, the inside jokes, the touch of a hand in a crowded room. Those were gone, replaced with silence, detachment, or worse, the distracted presence of a man whose heart was already gone. I was married, yet I had never felt more alone. I tried to pull him back, to remind him of what we once shared. I planned dinners, dressed up, laughed too loudly at his jokes, reached for him more. Sometimes he responded, but it never lasted. His mind wandered. His eyes strayed. What he gave me was half-hearted. While she seemed to draw out the parts of him I could no longer reach. No matter what I did, it couldn't compete with the rush of something new. The intoxication of falling in love with someone untouched by the weight of years. Eventually, I gave up. There comes a point where fighting for someone who has stopped fighting for you feels like begging for scraps. I pulled back quietly, protecting what little dignity I had left. I stopped asking questions I didn't want the answers to. I stopped waiting up for him. I stopped pretending we were still us. Instead, I lived in silence, carrying the grief of a marriage alive in name but dead in spirit. He never formally left me, but in every way that mattered, he was already gone. And that was the cruelest truth. There was no clear ending, no moment to mark as the break. Just a slow erosion until one day I looked around and realized I was standing alone in what used to be our life. I was alone in an open marriage, a wife without a husband, holding on to vows that meant nothing to him anymore. Regret became my constant shadow. I replayed the moment I agreed to open that door. The smile on his face, the relief in his eyes. I thought I was giving us a chance to find each other again. But what I really gave him was an exit disguised as freedom. I let him slip away with my blessing, and now I am left with the ashes of a love I once thought unbreakable. If I've learned anything, it's that love cannot survive without boundaries. Trust doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It means guarding the sacred space between two people. I thought saying yes was strength, but it was the start of my unraveling. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if he'll ever leave officially, or if we'll just keep pretending until the weight of it crushes us both. What I do know is that I am not the same woman who walked into this marriage full of faith and trust. I am someone who has learned painfully that compromise without respect destroys, that love without protection is fragile, and that sometimes the person you trust most becomes the one who leaves you the loneliest. I opened my marriage to keep him close, and ended up alone. That is the truth I carry every day, a truth I will never forget.